This is update for December 7, 2022, day 287 of the war and of the date update. So, as always, going to start with this sort of strategic topics, and we're going to switch to Ukrainian front line there. So, I'll start as always with energy. We discuss it a lot, but it affects everyone. Even most people don't realize, but they are extremely directly affected by the situation with energy. So let's see what's going on with the Russian exports. So there are some reports and I would say rumors that Russian seaborne crude oil export went down by 2 times in the last 48 hours. It's always probably related to all of the sanctions and so on. So despite Russia saying like, okay, we're switching to Asia, to China, India, Pakistan, Turkey, and all that stuff. Apparently, it's not going smoothly. Let's put it this way. I guess we'll find out a little bit more as things will definitely emerge because this is a huge drop and economic damage is extreme if this is true. So another data point from Russia is Russian Customs Service reported that their revenues or collection of custom duties went down by 48% in November comparing to November of 21. This is more related to the drop in Russian import, right? That's what we all know, that import or purchases of foreign goods in Russia went down tremendously. So, and the main source is VAT that's being charged on imported goods. So that's this one is kind of like more sort of explainable and sort of logical and reasonable situation in many ways, right? Then a little bit more about going back to Russian energy situation. So Russian pipeline called Siberian Power or Power of Siberia, whichever you want to prefer it. Finally reached its final destination, which is Shanghai in China. So as we can see, China and Russia quickly trying to increase capacity. To be fair, this pipeline started construction well before the war, but at the same time, as you can see, in a way, it was timely decision for Russia. So this is allowed to obviously switch the supply of natural gas a little bit more to China. At the same time, there are two main problems with all of this supplying of natural gas to China. Is first of all, the distance is really big from Siberia, from where it's being produced to where it's going to be used in China, which is essentially Shanghai area, basically all of those coastal areas. So distance is really big, which creates extra cost, right? So it reduces profit. And second is China is certainly not Europe, where you can get top dollar for your supply of natural gas. They pay the lowest amount they can. So again, this is going to be low margin sort of business for Russia, unlike let's say export to Europe, which is extremely profitable, extremely high margin business. So nevertheless, it still allows to sell natural gas somewhere better than nothing. Let's put it this way. And since Europe is closed, that's the best alternative. And Russia takes it, I guess. Then sort of related to the energy situation. This is this time out of Germany. So BASF, which is a large chemical conglomerate or producer, it produces a lot of basic chemicals that they being used as a feedstock to produce sort of more specialized products, mostly plastics. So they reduce production in Germany of acetylene. I don't know. That's how I probably didn't pronounce it very well. So feel free to correct me. I'll try to practice this in English. But in any ways, this is a base feedstock for the plastic production. So what this really means, again, going back to this whole big picture situation, is that this will continue keeping inflation high, because that really means downstream there will be shortages of some sort of plastics and products from plastic, and things gonna simply go up significantly, right? And plastic is one of the main components in the production, for example, of the cars. But essentially, anything uses tons of plastic these days, right? So again, situation with inflation is not sort of getting better anytime soon. Then I mentioned this before, but in France, I think they started sort of practicing this controlled blackouts, and the reason for that is this time is has nothing to do with this war or Russia even. This is actually internal, the result of internal policies in France, where they were just jumping from one sort of extreme to another extreme. So France is known for its huge fleet of nuclear power reactors. I think at least 50%, in some cases up to, depending on this sort of how many of them are in maintenance, could be up to 70% of electricity or power produced by nuclear in France. And that's one of the reasons why they were fighting so much with Wagner mercenaries in Mali and this like Sahara Africa, because there are deposits of uranium there that's then being used as a source of energy for these nuclear power stations. And so as a result of all of this, kind of like, oh, we're switching to this renewable energy, then now it's kind of like becoming clear that the switch is not going to happen, or it's going to happen at the cost of destroying society, and society simply will not exist, which means also it's not going to happen one way or another. It's just two ways sort of how it's not going to happen. But as a result of that, nobody was investing in sort of upkeep, maintenance of those nuclear reactors. So for that reason, a lot of them sort of being idle because they are simply not safe. And for that reason, that there is shortages of electricity in France, right? So again, this is a result of all of this, I would say, misguided worldwide this policies with respect to renewable energy and destruction of conventional energy. Not to mention that if used properly, nuclear power reactors probably the most cleanest source of energy on Earth. Then let's switch a little bit to China again, to Asia. There is more clear sort of economic data points coming out of China that is essentially imploding from within. So Chinese exports are down in November 8.7% on annualized basis. As you can imagine, sort of China is still manufacturing or factory of the world. And all this reflects a difficult situation in the world. Obviously, there are also other factors, such as a lot of global companies are trying to move production out of China. They understand where things are going, so they're trying to be proactive. But regardless, this will sort of create more internal discontent in problems in Chinese society, and probably may eventually force the hand of Chinese president in terms of forcing him into doing some military action, potentially against Taiwan. At the same time, this situation is more or less sort of mirrored by Taiwan, where exports, the same way for November, year on year, fell by actually even 13.1%. The largest sort of contributors to the decrease is China, with 20.9% decrease in export to China. Then Europe 19%, and US is the sort of relatively smaller number, 11.3%. This is also kind of logical. Many corporations probably also trying to pull out of Taiwan. At the same time, the kind of export it is, which is electronics, semiconductors, and so on, it's being used around the world, and it's probably more reflective of their sort of general global difficult economic situation, was obviously China is leading the way. Was, as I said many times, there is sort of that implosion of the Chinese economy because sort of two business models, which is one is export oriented, is broken because the global consumer is broken. There is basically uh, deglobalization happening, right? So we, the world is being sort of disconnected into several sort of potentially eventually separate islands, and then Chinese consumer, which was levered up or put into too much debt, cannot sustain its consumption, and it never was sustainable in the first place. So it just becomes very obvious at this point. Europe is also getting hurt because, as you can imagine, all of this failed energy policies were put to extreme in Europe. They are not as extreme in the US. They still pretty bad, but damage in Europe is sort of uncomparable relative to the US. So as a result of all of this, the global organizations that sort of encourage the globalization as in the world, which is IMF, World Trade Organization, World Bank, they're all coming to visit China starting December 8th and then also on December 9th. So again, this is people who are trying to save the global world coming to China to understand how to move forward, what strategy to sort of use going forward, and basically what to do about that. Then another point about China is Chinese president has arrived to Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned before, I think months ago. His visit was supposed to come, and the point of his visit, as I said then, is to basically sway all of the oil producers in Persian Gulf, which means not only Saudi Arabia, all of them, all of this countries are going to be there actually. So it's not meeting with just Saudi Arabia leaders. Basically, don't know the list, but pretty much everyone from the Persian Gulf is going to be there. And the point of the visit is to basically convince leaders of the Persian Gulf that the sort of new master should be China, not the US, essentially. And looking at the at the videos, how these leaders are sort of meeting with Chinese president, it's very clear that they're actually seriously considering this. There are numerous sort of signs how they behave that Chinese president may have quite a bit of success there. And the reason for that I already explained, that the West alienated Persian Gulf, and they don't see West as sort of as where the future is for the Persian Gulf, or in terms of mutually sort of beneficial relationships. So they essentially switching their sort of, let's say, vision to China, and China, India, that part of the world essentially, which they view as China as long-term consumer of natural gas and crude oil from the Persian Gulf. So essentially, China effectively cementing its position there by basically probably offering them some kind of agreement or deal that essentially will ensure supply of crude oil in case of military action. The only problem with all of that is it's all being used by seaborne traffic, which could be easily intercepted by the, let's say, UK Navy or US Navy, right? So still does not sort of guarantee anything, but at least China is probably building so like loyalties there, as loyal support in that part of the world. So they're not going to be actively supporting, let's say, the West in case of some potential conflict with the West. Then let's actually switch a little bit about military strategic topics. So there was an interesting statistic that was talking about the 155 millimeter shells, which is the main main caliber for the artillery in the war in Ukraine right now. So the statistics is saying, and to what extent it's correct, I'm not gonna say it's 100% correct, but here's some of the numbers. At least it's, gives some idea. Hopefully, it's not sort of totally off and incorrect. So Ukrainian side was using about 12,000 plus minus between 10 and 15,000 shells per day, 155 millimeter shells, I mean, per day during the most intense fighting in the summer. And Russia was using about like 35, 40,000 shells per day during the most intense sort of shelling. So as you can see, because there's a lot of data was showing, like, or sort of anecdotal data, when you ask like Ukrainian soldiers, they say, oh, it's 1 to 10. So as you can see, it's not actually 1 to 10. It's probably, let's say if we take like 12 to, let's say, 36, it's going to be 1 to 3. So it's definitely not 1 to 10 as sort of anecdotal stories are. It's more like 1 to 3. Okay, maybe it is 1 to 4. Let's assume, give a little bit sort of, opportunity for the mistake. So it's definitely not even close to 1 to 10. Which, okay, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, it's bad in terms of, like, you're definitely disadvantaged. But it's, if you're extremely skilled, it's possible to deal with that disadvantage. Let's put it this way. Again, going back to the whole discussion that Ukrainian side really lacking in terms of quality, and without sort of regaining that quality component, Ukrainian army will not be able to sort of win this war. Let's continue about this whole 55 millimeter shells. Just kind of have a big picture of what's going on with them in general. So U.S. U.S. Ministry of Defense, or whatever you call it, is set to purchase 164,000 155 millimeter shells in 2023. So as you can imagine, this is definitely not even close to be enough to cover the usage during, to cover intense use during this war. So there's definitely shortages of all of this are developing in, in Europe for sure. It's already it's been known, but I suspect that in US, eventually the shortages will develop, and that's why there's this move, because that's actually it's pretty large number, and that's a result of what's happening with the U.S. stockpile. Let's put it this way. Then, in terms of U.S. production, now it's about 14,000. The plan is to increase it to 20,000 by spring, and then to 40,000 sometime in 2024. So as you can imagine, this is per month, right? So even, let's say we take Ukraine, let's say Ukraine uses 10 during intense time, and let's say 5 or whatever, 5,000 during sort of lower intensity times. It's not covering the need even for, this even 40,000 production. It's not even covering like a third of a month. So you can see there will be huge shortage of 155 millimeter shells, an acute shortage, and probably something similar is happening in Russia, because we also hear rumors that Russia going to North Korea, to Iran, probably to China, and basically everywhere to buy more shells. So that's just kind of like one of the, let's say, weakest links in this whole war. Then and then actually sort of why it is important. Because Russian president said that this war is going to be lengthy process. Basically, it's going to last for a long time. And what he's trying to say is this is turning into war of attrition, which was very clear from the very beginning. This is going to be war of attrition. There is no sort of new revelation. It's pretty obvious what he says, but for many people, especially in the West, there's this kind of like hope. Oh, it's gonna go away very soon because it's so painful for us, and we just want to go away. It's not going away anytime soon. It's gonna be long, brutal process. And however, for the Ukrainian side, the problem is the way Ukraine it is right now. It's not set up to win in the war of attrition because there is no, as I said before, no quality component. And that's why I also want to say that if based on all of this, that there will be severe and acute shortage of 155 millimeter shells and 152 millimeter shells, which is essentially the same. From a perspective of this is the same thing. I don't mean that they're going to be used in the same cannons. What I mean is that both shells are used for the same purpose of artillery support and counter battery fire. Then another information, military information out of Russia, that this is again the Russian president saying that 150,000 of those conscripts already on the front line out of 300,000. If you remember, about months and a half ago, it was more like 87,000, if I remember it correctly. So the number goes up, and and I said before, for probably past week, there's higher and higher chance that Russia will do some kind of offensive, on this front line. Where it's going to be remains to be seen. And this is actually being picked up by one of the head of the military administration. So he's more like a civilian in Ukraine, responsible for Lugansk. So he actually mentioned today that that Ukrainians or reconnaissance forces are starting to see huge buildup of Russian troops around Svatove. And this is what I mentioned before, that there were 200 T-90 tanks were spotted about 5 days ago, plus minus. So, and I'm not saying it's happening, tomorrow or even a week, but there is very high probability that this offensive is going to be launched sometime in January, and it's going to be something that's going to be very hard for Ukrainian side to sort of to basically disrupt or to defend against. Let's believe if that's a better way to say it. Just because in many ways Ukrainian troops are being bled right now heavily by this fighting in North Donbass, and in a way it becomes maybe even a sort of like, I'm not saying that for sure that that's a strategy, but this could be very sort of interesting strategy from the Russian side. Is first bleed wide Ukrainian units with all of this Wagner mercenaries attacks, right? Just create huge attrition, especially among the sort of more experienced soldiers among Ukrainian units, and then attack later with sort of this newly trained, prepared troops sometime in January. So this could be a Russian strategy for this upcoming, December and January timeframe. But as I said, just want to highlight that the chances and probably this whole Russian counter, I would say, I don't know if it's offensive or counteroffensive, is becoming more and more material. Let's put it this way. Let's now actually switch to situation more sort of on the ground in Ukraine. Just quickly mention energy situation. Things are bad, but the power grid is still barely functioning. Definitely not going to survive, or I would say not definitely, as I say never, but it's very unlikely to survive another round of Russian rocket attacks, especially if it's going to be a big one like those ones that are seeing on November 23rd, on October 10th. If it's one of those, it's probably going to be sort of put to death. But At the same time, Russia is clearly having shortage of the missiles. They basically, once they manufacture enough, then they shoot. So there's very little inventory, and I'm talking about more sort of this precise ones. I'm not talking about the sort of, let's put this way, like old Soviet stuff that's essentially just junk. Um, Now let's switch to the walks through the front line as we always do, starting from the north, and then we're gonna do it in a clockwise fashion. So the situation along the state border is more or less the same. There is exchange of fire, but it's kind of like in the middle of the range. Let's actually now switch to this North Luhansk area where there is a potential for Russian uh, attack. So essentially, and there was some Ukrainian sort of small attack. It's essentially at this point just probing futile attacks that don't lead anywhere. There were no major Russian attacks here, but let's say if we look at the situation, it's the concentration here in the Svatove area. The most likely sort of passes out of all of this. Again, it's probably going to be one option is going to Kupiansk, but much more promising is go back basically to Izium, because that really offers many more opportunities for the Russian side. So basically, they want to roll back what they lost in September, essentially, if possible. We'll see, But as I said, accumulation is large. So it remains to be seen if Ukrainian units will be able to withstand that hit. At the same time, these units here are not sort of bled, uh, you know, bled white. So they sort of in much better shape than in North Luhansk, North Donbass area, which is actually where we're gonna go right now, and let's discuss the situation there. So again, Wagner mercenaries continuing their attacks, especially this in the sort of northern sector of it. There are reports that actually Wagner mercenaries managed to capture this village Yakovlivka. They're not confirmed, so once there is more sort of evidence to support that emerges, I'll sort of update the map. But it's obviously very concerning development because this is creating sort of more flanking situation for Soledar, where actually Russian side did not have much success moving. It was good sort of point to kind of like that was very good defensive positions for Ukrainian side. So essentially, this basically create like Soledar is outflanked, and in May force withdrawal from here, and obviously from all of this Bilohorivka, Vesely area as well. So essentially, this can potentially lead to the collapse or straining of Ukrainian front line here, and then obviously that puts into question this kind of Ukrainian salient on this side. But nevertheless, this is a very concerning development here. Which again says to us that the situation here is out of control from sort of Ukrainian perspective. Now let's look at the southern section of it. Things here are also not good. There are reports, again unconfirmed. As I have more information, then I'll either confirm or not. But they at least worth mentioning. Let's put it this way. So there is actually, it looks like Russian troops managed to get over this channel, which, as I mentioned before, it brings fresh water from Dnipro to generally the whole Donbass area. So it looks like they managed to establish a bridgehead on the western side of the channel, which is really bad development for Ukrainian side because this channel at least somewhat decent sort of natural defensive line that you can at least contain this Wagner mercenaries, but apparently that failed. So again, this is preliminary. I will confirm it once I have more information. But as you can see, things, it's definitely not great news, right? So if Yakovlivka here is lost, then There is even worse situation here. This salient becoming bigger. The front line here around Bakhmut is becoming more and more in danger. Let's put this way, in sort of very, I would say, diplomatic ways. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on central Donbass front line. Since here are somewhat quieter, there's no attacks out of the Spitsky salient, and as I said before, things here are much more sort of stable for Ukrainian side, in much better position here. The Russian sort of gains are uh, just so minimal that it will take another couple of years to make anything meaningful sort of problems for Ukrainian side, at least at this pace, right? There was some moment where it was um, Russian gains here in Pisky area were pretty quick and pretty strong, but apparently they are contained at this point there. Now let's switch to the Zaporizhya front line. So things are quiet here, and probably they will be quiet for quite a while. Let's put this way, unless as I said, that the initiative is slowly kind of moving back to the Russian side. It's not sort of in Russian hands, but it's sort of, let's put this way, they somewhat getting lost, getting out of Ukrainian hands, and not quite in Russian hands. So it's kind of like getting in the between. But the point is, the most important part is the trend. It's moving away from Ukrainian side to the Russian side. Whether the Russian side really will seize it, that's another question. But the trend for Ukraine is clearly is a negative. So this sort of expected attack out of this from the Zaporizhia front line towards the sea is very unlikely at this point to materialize. Because the density of Russian troops is going up, with every passing day. So, as I said, there is 150 now, and that's a minimum. It's possible there is more. Obviously, Russian president also has incentive to, misinform. So, again, things are clearly sort of started to move in major way, not in Ukrainian favor, and I would say the biggest problem is actually Ukraine. Within Ukraine, it's not a Russian problem. Not sort of problem driven by Russia, but it is from within of Ukraine that the country does not want to change, because it needs to become much more efficient and effective in order to survive. It just cannot win the war by being another sort of smaller Soviet army, as I said before. This is war of attrition, so the efficiency is the only way to survive for Ukraine. And so far, Ukraine is, I would say, not willing to learn the game of efficiency. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.